Did New York Gov. Andrew Cuomo reject a recommendation for his state to buy 16,000 ventilators in 2015 in preparation for a pandemic? No, that's not true. That is disinformation being spread among conservatives, misinterpreting the facts of a 2015 report by a New York task force about the need for ventilators during a pandemic. The reports of Cuomo rejecting a recommendation to buy 16,000 ventilators came from an article published by the Gateway Pundit on March 22, 2020, titled NY Gov. Cuomo rejected buying recommended 16,000 ventilators in 2015 for pandemic, established death panels and lottery instead, which opened, quote, "IFE comes at you fast, as the saying goes, or as the case may be in this era of a viral pandemic, death comes at you fast. Sadly, it is the latter for the citizens of New York who will pay the price for Gov. Andrew Cuomo's 2015 decision to not fix a shortfall and buy the recommended 16,000 ventilators to shore up the state's stockpile in case of a pandemic. Cuomo spent more money than the cost of the ventilators on a solar panel boondoggle, reports former New York Lieutenant Governor Betsy McCaughey in a syndicated column published this past week. McCaughey reports the Cuomo administration decided instead to establish triage officers to decide in a crisis who would get a ventilator and who would be left to die. End quote. Users on social media only saw this, quote, end quote. The report referred to as called ventilator allocation guidelines, and it outlined in stark details who would, and who would not, get ventilators if a pandemic hit the state and healthcare facilities began to run out of the life-saving equipment. The report did not make recommendations for the state to purchase 16,000 more ventilators, however, it did make clear that, in a severe pandemic, the state would have a shortfall of nearly 16,000 ventilators. The report was an update to 2007 guidelines. The report said, quote, "During a severe influenza pandemic, there is likely to be a projected shortfall of ventilators minus 15,783 during peak week demand." End quote. There was no recommendation or even a proposal to buy enough ventilators to fill the shortfall, according to the report, which explained, quote, "New York State has stockpiled 1,750 ventilators to help reduce ventilator need in the face of the moderate scenario. However, there are no current plans to buy enough ventilators for the most severe model." The state's current approach to stockpiling a limited number of ventilators balances the need to prepare for a potential pandemic against the need to maintain adequate funding for current and ongoing health care expenses. Furthermore, severe staffing shortages are anticipated, and purchasing additional ventilators beyond a threshold will not save additional lives, because there will not be a sufficient number of trained staff to operate them. End quote. The Gateway Pundit article gained traction after U.S. President Donald Trump cited the story in an interview on Fox News with Bill Hemmer, holding up a printed copy and offering to give it to the news anchor. The Gateway Pundit was citing a column by Betsy McCaughey, the New York Lieutenant Governor under Republican Gov. George Pataki from 1995 to 1998. The reports come as Democrat Cuomo's popularity has been rising from his daily news conferences, and as he has become increasingly critical of what he deems a slow federal response to the state's needs brought on by the coronavirus, or COVID-19, pandemic. In an impassioned plea on March 24, 2020, the governor implored the Trump administration to do more to help his state, which has become the epicenter of the outbreak in the United States. The governor said he needs 30,000 ventilators as soon as possible, as New York might see a peak demand of 140,000 urgent care patients in a matter of weeks. For his part, Trump tweeted the next day, early on March 25, 2020, that he is doing all he can, and that 4,000 ventilators are on its way to New York. Quote, "I am working very hard to help New York City and AMP, state. Dealing with both mayor and AMP, governor, and producing tremendously for them, including 4 new medical centers and 4 new hospitals. Fake news that I won't help them because I don't like Cuomo, I do. Just sent 4,000 ventilators. Donald J. Trump at Real Donald Trump, March 25, 2020." End quote. If anything, the 2015 report underestimated the severity of a pandemic, with Cuomo and state health officials now saying the state needs 30,000 ventilators, nearly double what the report anticipated. While the report did not recommend buying more ventilators, it did outline how ventilators would need to be allocated when sick patients overwhelmed hospitals. The report talks about a color-coded system to help prioritize who gets a ventilator and who doesn't.